Alright folks, so today what we're going to be talking about and looking at is the basic idea of what it means to be a citizen here in the United States of America and what your rights and your responsibilities are as a citizen working and living underneath a government of the United States. So the big thing here that we're just going to look at is once you are considered a full-fledged citizen, being 18 years old and legal status and everything else, at least to that particular point, you do have some things that are required of you when you're in the United States and working and living underneath our government. So that's what we're going to try to break down for you guys today. So we'll talk about this idea of being American citizens and everything else that basically happens. And first little short video of what goes into it.
As citizens of the United States, we all have rights and responsibilities. The U.S. Constitution lists basic laws and ideas our country follows. The Bill of Rights is the part of the Constitution that says all Americans have the right to free speech, own property, choose a religion, and go to school, among others. Along with these rights come certain responsibilities. A responsibility is something that it's your duty to do. This means that although you have the right to free speech, you also have the responsibility to be honest and try not to hurt others by what you say. In every community, citizens must take their responsibilities seriously. It's our responsibility to obey the law. When you go to a public park, you have the right to play on the playground, eat at the picnic tables, and enjoy the natural beauty of the park. You have the responsibility to keep your pet on a leash and put your litter in the trash can.
So basically, guys, what this talks about is with all of these things that you get, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all this, there are responsibilities and things that you have to follow in order to make sure those freedoms are allowed for everybody here in the United States. That's where this term responsibility basically comes into. So we'll talk about this idea of what your responsibilities are at each particular level and try to go through each one of them for all these other different kinds of things. So as such, you may not go around thinking of yourself as a citizen, but no matter what, you are going to be a part of a community, which basically is the idea of you have other people that are affected by your actions and everything else. So there are different levels, just like there are different levels of government, where you have local levels, which is basically your school, your city, your county kind of thing. Then you have state level stuff where for most of us that would be qualifying as the people and community of the state of Tennessee. And then you have the overall United States of America and nation as a whole that basically goes through all of these different kinds of things that happen. So you have three different levels of rights and three different levels of responsibilities you have to follow. All of these things that you are given, okay, is basically a right. And again, remember this. A right is something that you are given, but it's not necessarily set in stone. A right comes with responsibilities. If you don't live up to those responsibilities, rights can be taken away from you. In the state level, each state had its own set of rules, like it's calling a constitution that you have to follow. And you start to see where cities have their own sets of rules that are called charters and ordinances. And then finally, you have this idea where schools basically have a handbook of responsibilities and rules that you're allowed to follow, dress code, so on and so forth. So if you look at all these other different kinds of things, if you're starting up here at the top, it basically has you guys list like top to bottom. So like up here at the top where you could basically start all of these things, and let me go ahead and get the text box up here so you guys can see it, at least how this is supposed to work. And one particular general idea is you start off here, nations up here at the very top, and then you scroll down here, you may have a state level type thing, and then right here you may have a county thing, and then you have your city laws, and then for you guys and everybody else, you may have some school rules that you have to follow. So this again shows the different levels of rights and responsibilities that you have to follow, about 4 or 5 of them overall as far as these things go. And so if you look at all these things, can you think of any other sources of rights and responsibilities? Again, it's set up in, for most places, are what's called a constitution. All right, this is basically the easiest way of saying a rule book, and it lays out things you are given. Okay, so again, things you are given are your rights, and then things you must follow are your responsibilities overall. So you start to see all different kinds of things that go down here, with that being basically the nutshell of it. So again, this is where you have these rights. Like I told you guys before, a right is a privilege or a claim to something, okay, where you get freedom of expression and everything else. All right, rights are for everyone. These are things you are basically guaranteed for everyone living in the United States, not just for citizens. You have rights from each individual state. So each state basically gives you rights to have access to parks and everything else. Where are they? Handbooks, rule books, mainly constitutions, where you can basically find them overall without too many issues going through all this. Silent rights, these are basically things that says, okay, you have different ideas about how things are going to work, and it also says you have the right that you can't do things. So this is where you basically see stuff you're allowed to do and things you're not allowed to do. You also have different rights maybe at your house, and then responsibilities are the things you have to keep the community up and running. As far as all this at school, maybe not being able to chew gum, not being able to carry weapons, have hats on, whatever it may be. In the United States, you have other responsibilities like paying taxes. Everybody is supposed to pay their taxes. It's a way to guarantee that we have things using it. Everybody is supposed to participate in elections and voting and different things like that. And the main idea behind all this is to basically create a system where you are given things, but those things that are given to you also require some sort of action to keep those things up and running. So again, those are the different levels that you have as far as all this stuff. So if you look at all this, it says label each level you are a citizen. For example, the nation should read the United States. So like right here would be U.S., state would be Tennessee, city would be Chattanooga, school is your school, and home, whatever you want to call your house. Usually it's your last name in your household. Now it says label each level with the source. For an example, the nation would be like the U.S. Constitution. Tennessee, state constitution. City, Chattanooga charter. School, whatever your school handbook is. And then your home, just basic house rules that you are expected to follow. And then the next part right here, 5 rights you are granted from each level. So basically, what are things you are given? What are things you are given at each individual level? Nation, state, city, school, home. Like for home, you could be given water, electricity, whatever it is. If somebody gives you a cell phone that they're paying for, that's an example of a right that you are given as far as those things go. But always remember, guys, a right can be taken away from you. Everybody assumes that a right is something that you are given and it can't be taken away no matter what. Not true at all. A right is something you are given, but it can be taken away. There is a difference there, and we'll talk about that in a later lesson with something else. Then with those rights come different responsibilities. What are things you are expected to do on a national level? Pay taxes. State level, vote. City level, all right, pick up trash. School, basically follow dress code. Home, do your chores. Be the easiest way I could probably tell you after all of that. So next, we'll talk about this guy named Ted and his days of rights and responsibilities and what goes into it. So if you look at all these different kinds of things, it talks about Ted waking up and going through all this stuff and everything else that basically happened, and then what goes through all these other things as well. What rights and responsibilities did Ted exercise in his role? So what was he given as a U.S. citizen, and what did he do as a state citizen? So if you go back and look at all this stuff where Ted Ted, basically in his particular own idea, had his park rules and stuff that was more of a state level type thing, and then you had his middle school, Freedom Middle School, and all these other places that are given to him. So make sure you look at those two particular areas, and then city school level, and then his house as well. So that's just kind of showing you some real life things. This last part here, it is illegal to yell fire in a crowded theater because the responsibility of public safety comes before the right of speech, free speech, rather than another instance of responsibility being more important, all right, than a right. So basically, what you have here is a situation where you start to see, even though somebody has a right to do something, you may basically see a responsibility being more important. One topic of discussion would be wearing a mask. Is the responsibility of wearing a mask more important of the right to not wear a mask? I'll leave that up to you to basically decide. That would probably be a big conversation for some of you folks to basically break down for everything else that's been going on here in the last couple of days. So again, guys, we'll go through this quiz really quickly as far as this. What do you call a member of community who has a right and responsibilities? Okay, that's again a citizen. The Constitution sets rules. What does the city have? The city has charters. The U.S. Constitution grants its citizens rights, but not necessarily all its responsibilities. A blank is a group of people who share an environment, community, as far as all of those things. And then, as always, guys, at the end, what is the difference between a right and responsibility? Biggest one here, right is given to you. Responsibility is basically, is expected of you to maintain your rights. It is something that you must do. It is something that you have to do in order to keep your right that is given to you. And again, guys, the biggest thing that people kind of get flipped in their head about this is the idea of what is a right. A right is something that is given to you. It is not guaranteed, okay? Right of freedom of speech, freedom of this and that and the other, all these other rights, they can be taken away if you don't basically follow the responsibilities that come with them. That's a big thing for a lot of people still to understand even when they get older. Everybody thinks, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of this, that, and that always guarantees that. It does not. Those are different things we'll talk about later. That's called a liberty. A right is different than a liberty. Always can be. Liberties are things that can never be taken away from you. A right can. All right, and we'll talk about that in a future lesson.